Hello, sorry I can't be at the launch. My reason, I think, is a good one. I'm going to be reading in North Carolina the day before, and again in New York City the day after the launch. Hopefully, we'll sell some books. The Morelli thing I gave to Guernica for a number of reasons. In fact, so many that I had to make notes to make sure that I didn't leave any out. So let me, if you don't mind, let me read a note or two, or several. First of all, I always have known of Guernica as a publisher from, I don't know, middle 70s, on through the decades in between then and now, as a publisher that did not follow fashions. And that I admired that. Secondly, I have always admired the physical production of Guernica books. They're very handsome, great to hold, great to look at. Thirdly, I guess I have to mention that Guernica did do a book about my fiction, which was an honor for me. So thank you again for that, Guernica. And finally, and most importantly, I suppose, the enthusiasm of Michael Morelli for my book and for publishing me was a very special experience, given the history of my experiences with various publishers who are not always generous, kind, enthusiastic, supportive, and totally insightful. So, yeah, I guess I could go on with this, but those are the several reasons why I offered the book to Guernica. As far as the Morelli thing itself goes, this was Michael suggested that I might tell you why I wrote this book. Actually, this is a novel that I've been, I think, wanting to write ever since I turned to fiction writing in the early 90s. So this is like the 9th or 10th novel, but this is the one I wanted to do from the beginning and finally got around to doing. It concerns a man named Fred Morelli, who was born in Fiumefreddo, Italy, in 1901 and brought to the States at 2 or 3 months old. Lived in Brooklyn for several years in an immigrant community where he had no English for a good while. Went to schools in grammar schools in Brooklyn, with having teachers who surely had no Italian, I think. And so it was always interesting to me how this young fellow, at 18 years old, now we're talking maybe 10, 12 years after he started kindergarten in Brooklyn, suddenly emerging as a man of great English eloquence as a speaker and as a writer as well, who was offered and accepted a scholarship to Cornell University. So this is a story about a man, I think, who remarkably made himself in the vein of another novelist who wrote The Great Gatsby. The idea of I had the thought of calling this novel The Great Morelli, but unfortunately someone beat me to that idea, so I didn't want anyone to think about Fitzgerald. I didn't want that kind of competition, frankly. Now, I learned about Fred Morelli from my father when I was a teenager. He was murdered. I was call it an assassination, outside of the nightclub that he created in the middle 1940s. He was murdered on the evening of December 7th, 1941, which I call his personal Pearl Harbor in the novel. The thing about Morelli that I suppose grabbed me is the fact that he grew up within a stone's throw of where the house I lived in. His wife lived in a house just around the corner from the house I grew up in. In fact, I could see her house from the back porch of the house I lived in. The playground I played on as a very young boy was across the street from the house that he lived in with his parents in Utica, New York. So I always had the feeling for years that I was walking the streets that he walked, in a way breathing the atmosphere or the air that he breathed. And so this story of Morelli as the self-made Gatsby-like figure, Italian-American great Gatsby, who was murdered in Utica, New York, in circumstances by whom it was never, this crime was never solved. I was very interested in the crime and the circumstances of his death and life, and located an incredible website called Fulton History /newspapers.com, which collects 25 million pages of New York State newspapers. I typed in his name, Fred Morelli, Utica, New York, and up came numerous references and pages of the Utica Observer-Dispatch pertaining to him, the crime, the death, the aftermath, and so on. So the novel is in great part about how in the present, through a crime that is committed in the present, leads us back into the past of Morelli, which is not dead and not even past. So that is how the novel goes. What I finally hope to, another question that Michael asked me. Am I going on too long here? I'll tie this up quickly. Michael asked me what I hope to achieve with this writing of this novel, and I would say what I hope to achieve with writing this novel was what I get from writing any novel, which is the pleasure of the process in which I lose myself. Myself is always thought of myself as a good thing to lose, particularly myself, and that was a grand pleasure just to do that. I also, in thinking through this novel, doing the historical research, gathering the facts, and then imagining all these facts, as I quote Proust as an epigraph to the book, I invented nothing, I imagined everything. I got through to a point where I began to see the crime, the assassination of Fred Morelli, as an index to political and criminal interaction in Utica, how the chief political boss and the mafia figures that ran a good part of upstate New York were hand in glove, and how the crime committed against Morelli leads us not only into that, but into New York State politics, and finally into national politics and the presidential election of 1948. Harry Truman, and Thomas E. Dewey. So that's what. It's about all I think I can say at this point. Maybe you'll buy the book. Thank you.